The execution platform stood in the center of the pack square, and she was dragged to it in silver chains that burned through her skin like liquid fire. She'd killed a ranked wolf. That much was true. What the tribunal refused to acknowledge was that he'd been 3 seconds away from completing a forced claiming when she'd driven the silver blade through his throat. Self-defense meant nothing when you were powerless and he was the beater's son. The pack gathered to watch her die, some with satisfaction, others with the hollow-eyed indifference of wolves who'd learned not to question authority. She'd expected this. Had made peace with it during the 3 days she'd spent in the silver-lined cell beneath the pack house, her wolf so suppressed by the metal that she could barely feel its presence. What she hadn't expected was him. The alpha stood at the edge of the platform, and even from 20 feet away, she felt the wrongness that clung to him like a shroud. Every wolf in the territory knew about the curse. 7 mates in 12 years, each one dead within a day of accepting his mark. The first had been an accident, or so they'd claimed. By the third, whispers of divine punishment had begun. By the 7th, neighboring packs refused to send their daughters, and his own pack lived in constant fear of what would happen when the curse finally consumed him entirely. He hadn't taken a mate in 2 years. The pack was fracturing without a Luna, and his authority was beginning to crack under the weight of a curse no healer could break. "The tribunal has found you guilty of murder," the head elder announced, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "The sentence is death by exposure. You will be chained in the Deadlands until the silver poisoning takes you, or the rogue packs do. May the moon show you more mercy than you showed your victim." She didn't beg. Didn't cry. Just kept her eyes forward and waited for them to drag her away. "Stop." The alpha's voice cut through the square like a blade, and every wolf froze. He moved toward the platform with predatory grace, his eyes, pale as winter ice and twice as cold, fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "This rogue," he said slowly, never breaking eye contact, "is already condemned. Already marked for death. Already accepting of her fate." The elder shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, Alpha, which is why. Which makes her perfect." The silence that followed was absolute. She watched his expression, trying to understand what game he was playing. The curse had driven him half mad with isolation, everyone knew it. The pack needed a Luna to survive, but every woman who accepted his mark died screaming as something dark and ancient consumed them from the inside out. Some said it was his wolf, too powerful and too broken to bond safely. Others whispered about blood debts and moon goddess curses and sins committed by his ancestors. "I claim her as my mate," the alpha announced to the assembly. "If she survives the marking, she becomes Luna and her crimes are pardoned under pack law. If she dies," his smile was sharp and entirely without warmth, "then justice is served regardless." Horror rippled through the crowd. The elder looked like he wanted to object but couldn't find the words. She understood why. If the condemned rogue died from the alpha's curse, it solved the execution problem and no one had to actually chain her in the Deadlands to suffer. If she somehow survived, an impossibility everyone took for granted, the alpha finally had a Luna. It was cruel and efficient and completely insane. She should refuse. Should spit in his face and demand the death she'd been promised rather than become the 8th corpse in his collection of failed bonds. But something in his eyes stopped her, a desperate, furious grief that mirrored her own. He was offering her a chance, even if that chance was measured in hours instead of years. "I accept," she said. Her voice steady despite the terror flooding her veins. The alpha's eyes flashed with something that might have been surprise or respect or both. He crossed the platform in 3 strides and gripped her throat with one hand, not choking, just holding her in place as his claws extended and his wolf rose to the surface. "This will hurt," he warned, his voice dropping into a register that was more beast than man. "And then you'll die. They all die." "Then I'll die free instead of in chains," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Do it." He struck fast, teeth sinking into the junction of her neck and shoulder, the marking bite that would bind them as mates or kill her in the attempt. Power slammed through her like lightning, foreign and invasive and absolutely overwhelming. She felt his wolf crash against hers, felt the curse wrapped around his beast like barbed wire, felt the darkness that had killed 7 women before her reaching for her soul with claws extended. And then something inside her answered back. Light erupted from her skin, not silver like normal wolf auras, but gold shot through with veins of crimson like dawn breaking over a battlefield. The alpha jerked back with a sound of shock, his hand flying to his chest as if he'd been struck. The bond snapped into place between them with enough force to drive them both to their knees, and she felt his curse recoil from the light pouring through her veins like it had touched something sacred and been burned. She was still alive. Still conscious. Still breathing when she should have been convulsing and screaming and dying like all the others. The pack stared in absolute silence as the mark on her neck blazed with light that had no business existing in a wolf who was supposed to be powerless. The alpha looked at her with eyes gone wide with disbelief and something that might have been hope. "What are you?" he whispered. She didn't have an answer. But as power continued to flood through her veins and the mate bond burned between them like a brand, she realized with crystalline clarity that everything she'd believed about herself had been a lie. And the wolves who'd condemned her to death had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Crescent Moon Pack was the oldest territory in the Northern Highlands, built on laws that had stood for 3 centuries and ruled by an alpha bloodline that had never been challenged. Until 12 years ago, when the current alpha had ascended at 22 and the curse had manifested with his first mate's death. The pack historians claimed the curse was punishment from the moon goddess herself, retribution for some sin committed by his father or grandfather that had never been publicly named. Others whispered about darker things, blood magic, broken oaths, debts paid to entities that had no business in wolf affairs. Whatever the truth, the result was absolute. Any woman who accepted his marking bite died within 24 hours, consumed by a darkness that turned their eyes black and their screams inhuman before their hearts simply stopped. 7 mates. 7 corpses. 7 families that no longer spoke his name without flinching. The pack had fractured under the strain. Without a Luna to anchor the alpha's authority and provide the stabilizing influence that kept dominance hierarchies from collapsing into violence, wolves were beginning to fragment into factions. The ranked members still obeyed, but the loyalty was brittle, built on fear rather than devotion. Neighboring packs sensed the weakness and were starting to test their borders. Rogue attacks had tripled in the past year. The alpha needed a Luna to survive. But no woman would volunteer for certain death. Until her. She'd been pack-born but ranked so low she was practically invisible, a wolf with a beast so weak she'd never been able to fully shift. Never developed the enhanced strength or healing that made pack wolves formidable. Her wolf was a ghost inside her, present but pathetically inadequate. The kind of wolf that got assigned to kitchens and cleaning details, that was overlooked for training and excluded from hunts. When the beater's son had cornered her in the storage cellar and announced his intention to claim her regardless of her consent, she'd known no one would believe her over him. So she'd done the only thing she could, she'd fought back with the silver knife she'd been using to cut herbs for the pack healer. His death had been quick. Her condemnation had been quicker. What no one knew, what she'd hidden her entire life because the knowledge would have gotten her killed much sooner, was that her mother had whispered secrets before dying of silver poisoning when she was 8 years old. "Your father was Moonborn," her mother had said, her voice already fading. "First wolf lineage. The purest blood that exists. I hid you because they kill Moonborn children before they can awaken. Your wolf is dormant, not weak. When the time comes, when you need it most, it will rise." She'd spent 15 years believing it was fever dreams from a dying woman. Had accepted her weakness, her low rank, her invisible existence. Had never questioned why her wolf felt different, not absent, but sleeping. Waiting. The alpha's bite had been the catalyst her bloodline needed to wake. She could feel it now, surging beneath her skin like magma beneath stone. The bond with the alpha pulsed with power that should have killed her but instead felt like coming home to something she'd never known she'd lost. His curse, whatever darkness wrapped around his wolf, had recoiled from her light like it recognized something it couldn't consume. Through the bond, she felt his shock giving way to desperate hope. Felt his wolf, massive and damaged and barely controlled, circling hers with predatory curiosity and possessive certainty. Felt the curse that had defined his existence for 12 years writhing against her presence like a living thing that hated what she represented. She was still standing on the execution platform, still wearing silver chains, still condemned by tribunal verdict even if the alpha's claim technically superseded it. The pack was watching with expressions ranging from horror to awe to calculating speculation. The elder looked like he wanted to object but didn't dare contradict an alpha who'd just successfully marked a mate for the first time in 2 years. "Release her," the alpha commanded, his voice rough with emotions he was barely containing. "She's Luna now." The chains come off. The guards hesitated. One of them, a grizzled warrior who'd been pack for 40 years, stepped forward with clear reluctance. "Alpha, the tribunal is overruled by pack law," the alpha interrupted. "A marked Luna cannot be held in silver or tried for crimes committed before the bond. Remove the chains." The guard obeyed, and the silver fell away from her wrists with a clatter that sounded like freedom and condemnation in equal measure. Her wolf surged stronger without the suppression, and she felt power flood through her system with enough force to make her vision blur. "Come," the alpha said, extending his hand. Not demanding. Not commanding. Offering a choice when he could have simply dragged her away. She took his hand, feeling the bond flare brighter at the contact, and let him lead her off the platform while the pack watched in stunned silence. She had survived the curse. Had become Luna to a pack that had condemned her to death. Had awakened a bloodline that was supposed to be extinct. The alpha believed he'd found salvation in a condemned rogue desperate enough to accept his mark. He had no idea that he'd just bound himself to something far more dangerous than his curse could ever be. And when her full power finally awakened, when she remembered why Moonborn blood had been hunted to near extinction 5 generations ago, the pack that had sentenced her to die would learn exactly what happened when you tried to kill something that was never meant to stay dead. The alpha's chambers were located in the highest tower of the pack house, and she climbed the stairs in silence while her new mate walked beside her with predatory alertness that suggested he expected her to collapse at any moment. She could feel the pack's eyes on them through windows and doorways, wolves watching to see when the curse would claim another victim. Whispers followed in their wake like ghosts, and she caught fragments of speculation about how long she'd last. The betting pool, she learned from overhead murmurs, gave her 6 hours at most. "They think I'm going to die," she observed quietly as they reached the tower entrance. "They think you're already dead and just haven't realized it yet," the alpha corrected, his hand on the small of her back as he guided her through the doorway. The longest any mate survived was 18 hours. Most died within 6. What happened to them? His jaw tightened. The curse consumes from the inside out. Starts with nightmares, then fever, then their eyes go black and they start screaming. By the end, they're not themselves anymore, just vessels for whatever darkness is attached to my bloodline. Their hearts stop when there's nothing left to consume. The clinical description didn't hide the grief beneath it. She felt it through the bond, guilt and rage and helpless horror at watching 7 women die because they'd been brave enough or desperate enough to accept his mark. "I'm still alive," she pointed out. "For now." He opened the chamber door and gestured her inside. The room was Spartan, functional furniture, minimal decoration, everything built for utility rather than comfort. The bed was large enough for his wolf form. The windows reinforced with silver-laced bars that would prevent escape. A prison disguised as luxury. "I won't lock you in," he said, following her gaze to the door. "If you want to leave, you can. If you want to run when the curse starts to take hold, I won't stop you." How generous. His smile was bitter. 7 women have died in this room. I've learned that forcing them to stay only makes the dying worse. She turned to face him fully, studying the male who was now her mate whether she'd planned it or not. He was young for an alpha, 34 at most, but the curse had carved lines around his eyes and mouth that made him look older. His wolf prowled just beneath his skin, visible in the way his eyes occasionally flashed with luminescence and his muscles tensed like he was constantly prepared to fight or flee. "What's your name?" she asked. "You don't know? I know your title." "Not your name." He looked surprised, then something that might have been pleased. "No one's asked me that in years. They just call me Alpha or Curse-bearer or the Widower." He paused. "It doesn't matter anymore. Names are for wolves who have futures." "I survived your mark," she said. "That gives us both a future, doesn't it?" For 6 to 18 hours, apparently. She felt her wolf stir inside her, stronger now without the silver suppression, responding to the challenge in his voice with a growl that resonated in her chest. The alpha's eyes widened fractionally, and she realized he'd heard it too, felt it through the bond that connected their beasts. "Your wolf," he said slowly. "It's not weak." "No," she agreed. "It never was. But you couldn't shift." The pack records. "The pack records are based on a wolf that was deliberately suppressed," she interrupted. "My mother was Moonborn. First wolf lineage. She sealed my abilities before she died to keep me safe from wolves who kill children with bloodlines they fear." The revelation hung between them like a blade. The alpha stared at her with dawning comprehension and something that looked like horror. "Moonborn blood hasn't existed for 5 generations," he said carefully. "The last of that lineage was executed after." He stopped, his expression shifting. "After they tried to break a curse that was killing an alpha's mates." Ice flooded her veins. "What?" "It's in the oldest pack histories. 5 generations ago, an alpha in the Southern Territories was cursed by a witch he'd wronged. Every mate he took died within days. A Moonborn healer tried to break the curse by binding it to her own bloodline, sacrificing herself to save the alpha and his future mates." His eyes were locked on hers now, burning with intensity. "It worked. The alpha lived, married, had children. But the Moonborn healer's family was executed afterward because the other packs feared what would happen if that kind of power, the ability to bind or break curses, spread to other bloodlines. They killed them all," she whispered, understanding flooding through her. "They killed them all," he confirmed. "Except apparently they didn't. Because you're standing here, carrying blood that was supposed to be extinct, and you survived a curse that should have killed you." The bond between them pulsed, and she felt his wolf pressing against hers with desperate need and carefully restrained hope. He understood now, understood that she wasn't just a condemned rogue who'd gotten lucky. She was the first Moonborn in 5 generations, carrying abilities that could potentially break the curse that had destroyed his life. "I don't know how to break curses," she admitted. "I don't even fully understand what I am. My mother died before she could teach me anything. But you survived my mark when no one else could." "Yes. Which means your bloodline recognized the curse and countered it somehow." He stepped closer, his hand coming up to trace the mark on her neck that still glowed faintly with gold-red light. "Which means there's a chance, however small, that you're not going to die in 6 hours." She felt the touch like electricity, felt her wolf respond with possessive certainty that this male was hers regardless of how the bond had formed. "And if I don't die? Then we figure out how to break this curse permanently," he said simply. "Before it finds a way to consume you anyway." It was ambition and desperation and brutal honesty all wrapped together. No false promises, no guarantees. Just acknowledgement that they were both trapped in something larger than themselves and their only option was to fight their way out together. "I'll need access to the pack archives," she said. "Everything you have on curses, Moonborn abilities, and that Southern Alpha who was saved 5 generations ago." "Done. What else?" "Protection from pack members who want me dead. The tribunal may have been overruled, but I still killed the beater's son. His father won't forget that." "The beater answers to me," the Alpha said, his voice dropping into a register that made her skin prickle with awareness of exactly how dangerous he was. "If he makes a move against you, I'll remove him from rank myself. And if I do die from the curse?" His expression went carefully blank. "Then I'll fulfill the original execution order personally. It's the least I can do." She almost laughed at the dark pragmatism of it. "How comforting." "I'm not trying to comfort you," he said. "I'm trying to be honest. You deserve that much after everything you've survived." The sincerity in his voice, in the bond itself, hit her harder than she expected. For the first time since the execution platform, she let herself actually feel the full weight of what had happened, condemned to death, marked by a cursed alpha, surviving against impossible odds, discovering she carried extinct bloodline abilities, and now bound to a male she barely knew in a pack that wanted her dead. It should have broken her. Instead, she felt something fierce and hungry rising in her chest. She'd been powerless her entire life. Invisible. Dismissed. Sentenced to die for defending herself from assault. If she was going to die anyway, she'd rather die fighting a curse that had killed 7 women before her than waste away in silver chains. And if she survived, if she somehow broke this curse and awakened her full abilities, then every wolf who'd condemned her would learn exactly what happened when you tried to execute someone who was never meant to stay dead. "How long do we have before the symptoms usually start?" she asked. "The nightmares begin within the first hour," he said quietly. "Then fever, then the darkness." She looked at the window, gauging the light. "Late afternoon. Maybe 3 hours until sunset. Then we should start researching now," she said. "Before I'm too compromised to read." His smile was grim and carried the weight of 7 failures. "You're not what I expected. Neither are you." The bond pulsed between them, 2 broken wolves bound by a curse and a bloodline that might save them both or kill them trying. The pack archives were located 3 floors beneath the main house, sealed behind silver-reinforced doors that required alpha clearance to open. She descended into the cool darkness beside her mate, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down from above. "No one's accessed these records in decades," the alpha explained as he pressed his palm to the biolock. "Everything that matters is digitized now. But the oldest documents, the ones written before we had computers, are still here." The door swung open to reveal rows of shelves stretching into shadow, packed with leather-bound journals, loose parchments, and wooden boxes that smelled of age and preserved paper. The air was dry and still, maintained by climate control systems that kept the historical records from deteriorating. "The curse documentation is in Section 7, he said, leading her deeper into the archive. "My father compiled everything he could find when the curse first manifested. He died believing there was no cure." "How did he die?" "Gave up his alpha position to me and walked into the Deadlands," he said flatly. "Took his own life rather than watch me suffer what he thought was punishment for his sins." She felt the old grief through the bond, a wound that had never properly healed. "What sins? If I knew, I'd have fixed them years ago." He pulled a leather-bound volume from the shelf and set it on the reading table. "This is the master compilation. Everything the pack historians could find about curses targeting alpha bloodlines going back 8 generations." She opened the book carefully, mindful of pages that were brittle with age. The text was handwritten in formal script, cataloguing cases of supernatural afflictions, blood curses, and divine punishments that had targeted various alpha families throughout history. Most had resulted in death or complete pack dissolution. One entry made her stop cold. "Southern Highlands Pack, Generation 17, she read aloud. "Alpha cursed by witch after executing her daughter for practicing forbidden magic. Curse manifestation, all mates died within 3 days of marking. Solution attempted, Moonborn healer binding curse to her own bloodline, sacrificing herself to create a barrier between the curse and future mates. Result, Alpha survived, curse contained but not broken. Moonborn healer's family executed to prevent knowledge of curse-binding techniques from spreading." "That's the one I mentioned," the Alpha said quietly. "The only documented case of a Moonborn successfully countering a mate death curse." "Countering, not breaking," she noted. "The curse was still there. It just couldn't reach the mates anymore. Which suggests the curse might still be attached to that Alpha's bloodline, just dormant." He leaned over the book, reading the entry with her. "If your ancestor bound curses by sacrificing herself, taking them into her own blood, then maybe your survival means you're doing the same thing. Not breaking my curse, but containing it within yourself." The thought was horrifying. "So I'm just a vessel now? Slowly being consumed from the inside?" "Or your bloodline evolved defenses against that consumption," he countered. 5 generations of Moonborn hiding and surviving in secret might have developed immunity to the very curses your ancestors died binding. It was theory built on speculation, but it was the first explanation that made sense. She touched her neck where his mark still glowed faintly with gold-red light. Through the bond, she could feel his curse like a presence at the edge of her awareness, dark and hungry and held at bay by something in her blood that refused to let it through. "I need to test something," she said suddenly. "What?" She closed her eyes and reached for her wolf, not the weak, suppressed beast she'd carried for 23 years, but the power her mother had sealed away. It answered immediately, rising through her like dawn breaking, and she felt her body begin to shift for the first time in her life. The transformation hurt less than she'd expected. Bones reformed, muscles restructured, Fur erupted across skin that had never held a pelt before. When she opened her eyes again, the world had sharpened into crystalline clarity, scents layering in ways she'd never experienced, sounds separating into distinct threads, vision extending into spectrums that human eyes couldn't process. The Alpha stared at her with naked shock. "Your wolf." She looked down and understood his reaction. Her wolf wasn't the small, weak creature that matched her human size. It was massive, easily matching an Alpha-class beast, with fur that shifted between gold and deep crimson depending on how the light hit it. Moonborn coloring. First wolf genetics expressing themselves after 5 generations of suppression. Through the bond, she felt his wolf respond with immediate, possessive approval. She shifted back to human form, the transformation easier this direction, and met his eyes. "My bloodline isn't just surviving the curse. It's overpowering it. Which means you're not going to die," he said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. "Not from the curse, anyway." She turned back to the archive. "But this doesn't break it. We're still bound together with your curse contained between us. What happens if the bond breaks?" His expression shuttered. "The curse would revert to its original state. Any mate I tried to take afterward would die. And I'd probably keep the curse fragment I'm containing," she added. "Which might kill me slowly even if it can't do it quickly. So we're trapped," he said flatly. "We're bonded," she corrected. "There's a difference. Trapped implies we have no choices. Bonded means we figure this out together or not at all." She saw something shift in his expression, the careful distance he'd been maintaining cracking slightly under the weight of actual hope. 7 mates had died. He'd learned not to hope, not to believe anyone could survive what he carried. But she was standing here, fully shifted for the first time in her life, alive and strong and not showing any symptoms of curse consumption. "The tribunal still wants you executed," he said quietly. "The beater definitely wants you dead for killing his son. Half the pack thinks you're a curse in yourself. If they find out you're Moonborn, they'll fear you even more." "Let them fear," she said, feeling her wolf rise inside her with predatory certainty. "I've spent my entire life being powerless and afraid. I'm done with that. If the pack can't accept a Luna who's strong enough to survive what killed 7 women before her, then maybe this pack doesn't deserve to survive." It was harsh truth delivered without apology. The Alpha studied her for a long moment, then smiled, a real smile this time. Sharp and dangerous and full of savage approval. "You're not what I expected," he repeated. "You said that already. It's still true." He closed the archive book and pulled another from the shelf. "If we're going to break this curse instead of just containing it, we need to find the witch who cast it in the first place. Curses this powerful usually have a bloodline anchor, someone living who maintains the spell's integrity. Your father's research didn't find them?" "My father assumed the curse was divine punishment. He never looked for a witch." The Alpha's smile turned lethal. "But I've spent 12 years trying to break this curse, and I've learned things my father never knew. There's a witch community in the eastern lowlands, descendants of the covens that were purged 300 years ago. If anyone knows about mate death curses, it's them. When do we leave?" "You want to go into witch territory," he said carefully, "where they have no reason to help us and every reason to hate wolves." "I want answers," she corrected. "And I want this curse broken permanently so neither of us has to spend our lives wondering when the other shoe will drop. If that means walking into hostile territory, so be it." She felt his approval through the bond recognition that she wasn't content to simply survive. She wanted to win. "We leave at dawn," he decided. "Before the pack realizes what we're planning and tries to stop us." "The beater." "I'll handle the beater," he interrupted. "You focus on not dying before we reach witch territory." It should have been dark humor. Instead, it felt like a promise. They were in this together now, curse and all. She just had to hope her Moonborn blood would be enough to keep them both alive long enough to break what should have killed her hours ago. They left before dawn, slipping out of pack territory through the eastern border where patrols were lightest and questions were few. She'd spent the night in the Alpha's chambers, waiting for curse symptoms that never came. No nightmares. No fever. No darkness consuming her from the inside out. Just the steady pulse of the mate bond and the sensation of something vast and ancient stirring inside her bloodline, responding to the curse's presence by building walls it couldn't penetrate. The pack would notice their absence by mid-morning. The beta would assume the alpha was disposing of his latest dead mate and wouldn't question it until they failed to return by evening. By then, they'd be deep enough into neutral territory that pursuit would be difficult. "Tell me about the witch community," she said as they moved through the forest with enhanced wolf speed, not quite running but covering ground faster than humans could follow. "They call themselves the Thornwood Coven," the alpha replied, his voice pitched low even though there was no one around to overhear. "Descendants of witches who survived the purges by hiding their magic and living as humans. They've been rebuilding in secret for the past 100 years, learning old spells, recovering lost knowledge, training new generations. And they hate wolves. They have reason to. Wolves led most of the purges. We enforced the laws that declared magic illegal and witches subject to execution on sight." His expression was grim. "My great-grandfather participated in the Eastern Purge. Personally killed at least 20 witches, including children." She felt the shame bleeding through the bond, inherited guilt for sins he hadn't committed but wore like a brand anyway. "So walking into their territory might get us killed on principle." "Probably. Then why are we going?" "Because the curse on my bloodline is too sophisticated to be random divine punishment," he said. "It targets mates specifically, kills them in a way that maximizes suffering, and has lasted for 12 years without weakening. That's witch magic, deliberate, anchored, and maintained by someone with enough power to keep it active across generations. You think your family's sins are being avenged. I think a witch whose family was murdered by my ancestors decided to make sure I suffered the same loss 7 times over." His jaw tightened. "And I think if we can find them and offer the right compensation, we might be able to negotiate a curse breaking." What compensation could possibly be enough? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was carefully neutral. "That depends on what they want. Justice. Revenge. Blood debt repaid. I'm willing to negotiate anything that doesn't require hurting innocents." She heard the unspoken caveat: he'd sacrifice himself if it meant breaking the curse and protecting future mates from his family's sins. "We're not negotiating your death," she said flatly. "You don't get to decide that." "I'm your mate and I'm Moonborn," she countered. "I get to decide exactly that. If this curse needs blood to break, it'll take mine first." His hand shot out and caught her wrist, pulling her to a stop in the middle of the forest path. "Don't," he said, his voice rough with emotion she could feel mirrored in the bond. "Don't volunteer to die for a curse that's been killing my mates for 12 years. You survived it, that's more than anyone else managed. I'm not letting you throw that away for." "For what?" she interrupted. "For you. For the chance to break a curse that's destroyed your life. For the satisfaction of not being another corpse in your collection. For me," he said quietly. "I'm not worth dying for." She stared at him, feeling the bone-deep certainty bleeding through the bond that he believed it, that 12 years of watching mates die had convinced him he was cursed in more ways than one, that anyone who bound themselves to him was doomed, that he wasn't worth saving. "You're my mate," she said simply. "Whether I chose it or not, whether you think you're worth it or not, we're bound now. And I'm not walking away from that because you've decided you're not worth fighting for." Something in his expression cracked. For just a moment, she saw past the alpha authority and the curse-bearer grief to the male underneath, exhausted, desperate, and clinging to control by his fingernails. Then the moment passed and he released her wrist. "The Thornwood border is 3 hours ahead. We should reach it by mid-morning." She let him change the subject. They'd have time for emotional reckonings later, assuming they survived the next few days. They moved in silence for another hour, the bond humming between them with a connection that was still too new to be comfortable but felt increasingly natural. She could sense his wolf prowling just beneath his skin, powerful and tightly controlled, watching her wolf with predatory approval. Could feel his awareness of her matched by her awareness of him, their movements syncing unconsciously until they were moving through the forest in perfect coordination. Mate bonds were supposed to develop slowly over months or years. Theirs had formed in hours under the pressure of imminent death, and it showed in how intense everything felt, like they'd skipped all the careful courtship and landed directly in the deep end of connection. "Tell me about your mother," the Alpha said suddenly. "How did she hide Moonborn heritage for 23 years? She considered how much to share, then decided honesty was easier than lies. She was already dying when I was born. Silver poisoning from something that happened before she reached pack territory. She sealed my wolf with the last of her power and told the pack I was human, that she'd bonded with a human male who'd abandoned her. They believed it because why would she lie about something that made her rank plummet? And when she died, I was 8. The pack kept me because healers are always useful and having a human servant who couldn't challenge pack hierarchy was convenient." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "I spent 15 years being grateful they didn't throw me out. Never questioned why I was the only human in the territory who could sense pack bonds or hear wolves talking from 100 yards away. Just accepted that I was weak and powerless and lucky to be tolerated." "You're none of those things," he said quietly. "I know that now." She felt her wolf stir inside her, vast and powerful and done with hiding. "But it took being condemned to death and surviving your curse to figure it out. So maybe I should thank the tribunal for the death sentence. It forced me to stop pretending to be something I'm not. Dark way to find yourself," says the Alpha who's been cursed for 12 years. His laugh was unexpected and genuine, and she felt it echo through the bond like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Fair point." They emerged from the tree line into a clearing that marked neutral territory between Wolflands and Witch Domain. A stone marker sat at the center, carved with warnings in 3 languages that all said the same thing: "Cross this border without permission and forfeit your life." "Welcoming," she observed. "They mean it." The Alpha studied the marker with professional assessment. "The Thornwood Coven has wards 3 layers deep past this point. If we cross without invitation, they'll know immediately and respond with lethal force. So how do we get an invitation?" He pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden token carved with symbols she didn't recognize. "I sent a message 3 days ago. Before the execution. Before I marked you. This token is proof I'm serious about negotiating. 3 days ago you didn't know I existed," she pointed out. 3 days ago I was planning to offer myself as blood payment to break the curse permanently," he corrected. "Finding you changed the stakes but not the goal. I'm still willing to negotiate whatever it takes." She felt the truth of it through the bond, his desperate determination to end the curse even if it meant his own death. It should have made her angry. Instead, she felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. "We're negotiating together," she said firmly. "Both of us walk out of Witch territory or neither of us does." "Understood." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Understood." He placed the token at the base of the marker and stepped back. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the air shimmered, and a woman stepped through what had been empty space a moment before. She was younger than expected, maybe 30, with dark hair woven through with bone beads and eyes that glowed faintly with barely restrained power. Witch-marked and powerful, and looking at them with the kind of cold assessment that preceded either negotiation or violence. "Alpha," she said, her voice carrying an accent that sounded like old forests and older magic. "You requested an audience. State your business or turn back now." "I'm here to negotiate the breaking of a mate-death curse," the Alpha said evenly. "One I believe was cast by your coven or someone connected to it." The witch's smile was sharp and entirely without warmth. "You're correct. The curse was cast by my grandmother before she died. Blood payment for family murdered by yours 3 generations ago." She turned her attention to the mark on the protagonist's neck, and something like surprise flickered across her features. "But you brought a mate who survived the curse." "Interesting. She's Moonborn," the Alpha said, and she felt his wolf rise defensively at the witch's scrutiny. "First wolf lineage. That would explain it." The witch circled them slowly, studying with professional interest. "Moonborn blood can contain curses that would kill anyone else. Your grandmother must have been skilled indeed to bind a curse to your bloodline this way. She bound it to my family line specifically." The Alpha confirmed. "Every mate I take dies within 24 hours. 7 women are dead because of sins my ancestors committed. Yes, the witch agreed without remorse. That was the point. The blunt admission hung in the air between them like a blade. The Alpha's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice level. What would it take to break the curse? Name your price. The witch's smile widened. Oh, Alpha. You can't afford my price. And before either of them could react, the clearing exploded with magic that wrapped around them like chains and dragged them both into darkness. She woke in a cell that smelled of old stone and older magic, with silver chains around her wrists that burned like acid. The Alpha was in the cell across from hers, similarly restrained, his wolf snarling at the surface in response to the silver contact. Through the bond, she felt his fury and his guilt, angry at the ambush, guilty that she'd been caught in it. Not your fault, she sent through the connection, still learning how to use the bond for communication. We walked into this together. I should have anticipated a trap, he sent back, his mental voice rough with self-recrimination. Should have brought backup, should have. Should have what? Died alone 12 years ago? She pushed herself upright despite the silver burns, assessing their prison. We're alive. That means we still have options. The cell was small but well-maintained, recent construction rather than ancient dungeon. The door was solid wood reinforced with silver, warded against forced entry. No windows. Single magical light source embedded in the ceiling. Designed to hold supernatural prisoners without killing them. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. The witch from the border appeared, flanked by 2 others who radiated enough power to make the air shimmer. She stopped between the cells and studied them with clinical interest. The curse was never meant to be broken, she said without preamble. My grandmother bound it to your bloodline with her dying breath as payment for watching her children burn. Every mate you take, every woman who dies screaming, is justice for the lives your family destroyed. I'm not my ancestors, the Alpha said through gritted teeth. I didn't kill your family. But you benefit from it, the witch interrupted. Your pack thrives on land stolen from covens your grandfather destroyed. Your wealth is built on resources taken from witches who were executed for practicing their craft. You live with the privileges your family murdered to obtain. Her expression was cold as winter. The curse was never about you specifically. It was about making sure your bloodline suffered the way mine did, slowly, repeatedly, with no escape. Then why are we still alive? The protagonist asked. If the goal is suffering, you could have killed us in the forest. Because you're Moonborn, the witch said, turning her attention fully to her. And that changes things considerably. Your bloodline was supposed to be extinct, executed 5 generations ago for the crime of being powerful enough to challenge witch magic. Finding you alive and bound to a cursed Alpha is unprecedented. Meaning you're valuable enough to negotiate with. The witch gestured to her companions, who moved forward with keys to the silver chains. The coven has a proposal. One that benefits everyone if you're smart enough to accept it. The chains fell away, and immediate relief flooded through her system as the silver burns began to heal. Across the corridor, the Alpha received the same treatment, though he remained tense and ready for violence. What proposal? She asked carefully. Your Moonborn abilities can bind curses, take them into your own blood and neutralize them. That's how your ancestor saved the Southern Alpha 5 generations ago. The witch's smile was calculating. The coven has been collecting curses for 300 years. Storing them, studying them. Using them as tools of justice against wolves who wrong us. But stored curses are unstable. They require constant maintenance and eventually begin to degrade. Understanding began to dawn. You want me to contain them. We want you to serve as the coven's curse repository, the witch corrected. Take our most dangerous curses into your bloodline where they can't harm anyone unless we specifically want them to. In exchange, we break the mate death curse on your Alpha and guarantee protection from any wolf pack that tries to execute you for being Moonborn. It was slavery dressed up as negotiation. She'd go from being condemned by wolves to being owned by witches, a living storage unit for magical weapons she couldn't control. And if I refuse? Then you and your cursed Alpha stay in these cells until the curse finally finds a way around your Moonborn defenses and kills you both. The witch's expression didn't change. My grandmother's curse is patient. It can wait years if necessary. Eventually, your bloodline's immunity will fail, and you'll die the same way his other mates did. We can afford to wait. Through the bond, she felt the alpha's rage building, not at her, but at the witch's casual cruelty, at the impossible choice being forced on them both. His wolf was snarling for release, desperate to fight even though they were outnumbered and outmatched. Don't, she sent through the bond. Fighting now gets us killed. We need time. They're trying to enslave you, he sent back, his mental voice vibrating with barely leashed violence. I know. But dead doesn't help either of us. She turned to face the witch fully, keeping her expression carefully neutral. How many curses are we talking about? Currently, 43 active curses of varying severity. Some are simple misfortune hexes. Others are mate-death curses like the one on your alpha. A few are significantly worse. The witch tilted her head, studying her reaction. Your Moonborn blood can theoretically contain all of them. Whether you'd survive the process is another question. And if containing them kills me, then we find another Moonborn. Your bloodline isn't as extinct as we thought. If one survived, others might have as well. The casual dismissal of her life hit like a physical blow. She was a tool to these witches, nothing more. Useful for her bloodline abilities, disposable if those abilities proved insufficient. Give us time to consider, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. This isn't a decision to make lightly. The witch laughed. You have until tomorrow at dawn. Accept our terms, or spend the rest of your short lives in silver chains watching the curse slowly consume you both. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and don't bother trying to escape. The wards on this facility would kill you before you made it 10 feet from your cells. We've had 300 years to perfect prison construction. She left with her companions, and the door sealed behind them with a sound of finality that echoed in the sudden silence. The protagonist waited until she was certain they were alone, then turned to face the alpha across the corridor. Through the bond, she could feel his despair warring with rage, fury at their situation, guilt that she was trapped because of his curse, helpless knowledge that he had no solution. We're not accepting their terms, he said quietly. I know. And we're probably not escaping either. Probably not, she agreed. So we die here. Not a question. Just acknowledgement of their reality. She looked at him, this male who'd given her a choice when he could have kept her in chains, who'd marked her knowing she'd probably die, who'd spent 12 years carrying guilt for deaths he couldn't prevent. The mate bond hummed between them, still new but growing stronger with every hour, connecting them in ways that went deeper than flesh. Or we find a third option, she said quietly. One that doesn't involve slavery or death. Such as. She touched the mark on her neck where his bite still glowed faintly gold red. Through the bond, she could feel his curse, contained but not broken, held at bay by her Moonborn defenses but still hungry for release. And beneath that, she felt something else. The stirring of power her mother had sealed away, waking fully for the first time, responding to the threat with ancient instincts that remembered when Moonborn wolves had been powerful enough to challenge witch magic directly. Such as learning exactly what I'm capable of, she said. And using it to burn this place down from the inside. His eyes widened. You're talking about breaking witch wards that have stood for 300 years. I'm talking about being Moonborn, she interrupted. First wolf lineage. The bloodline witches feared enough to execute children. My mother sealed my abilities to keep me safe, but she also kept me ignorant of what I could do. She met his gaze steadily. Maybe it's time to find out. Through the bond, she felt his wolf respond with fierce approval, recognition that his mate wasn't content to submit or die quietly. That she was willing to fight even when the odds were impossible. What do you need from me? He asked. Time, she said. And trust. Whatever I'm about to attempt, it's going to hurt and it might not work. But it's better than accepting slavery or waiting to die. He nodded slowly. Then do it. I'll watch the door and warn you if they come back. She closed her eyes and reached for her wolf, not the gentle awakening from before, but deeper. Past the beast, past the instincts, down into the core of what Moonborn heritage actually meant. Power answered immediately, Vast and ancient and absolutely merciless. Not just wolf, but something older. The original blessing that had created their kind, when the moon goddess had first touched human souls and given them beasts to carry inside their hearts. First wolf magic. Primordial and pure and capable of things modern wolves had forgotten. Including breaking curses that should have been unbreakable. She just had to hope she was strong enough to survive learning how. The power came in waves that threatened to drown her. She'd expected abilities similar to normal wolf enhancement, stronger, faster, better healing. What she got instead was something far more primal and infinitely more dangerous. Moonborn wolves didn't just carry enhanced wolf traits. They carried the original blessing, the pure magic that had created their entire species. The ability to manipulate the fundamental forces that governed wolf nature, bonds, hierarchy, transformation, and the thread connecting all wolves to the moon goddess herself. She could feel it thrumming through her veins like liquid starlight. Could sense every pack bond within a 100-mile radius, feel the curse wrapped around her mate like chains, taste the witch wards surrounding their prison like bitter smoke on her tongue. And she could touch them. Reshape them. Break them if she had the strength and the will. Are you all right? The alpha's voice cut through her concentration, concern bleeding through the bond. I'm fine, she managed, though fine was relative when power this vast was threatening to tear her apart from the inside. The wards aren't as strong as they think. What do you mean? Witch magic works by imposing will on reality, forcing the world to conform to their desired outcome through ritual and sacrifice. She opened her eyes, seeing the cell walls overlaid with glowing threads of magical energy that formed the containment wards. But Moonborn magic is older. We don't impose will. We work with existing forces, bonds, instincts, the natural magic that already exists in the world. The wards are designed to block wolf abilities, but they're not calibrated for something that predates modern pack magic. Can you break them? Maybe. She stood, approaching the cell door carefully. The wards pulsed with hostile intent, ready to activate if she tried to force her way through. But breaking them will alert every witch in the facility. We'd have minutes at most before they overwhelmed us. Then we need a plan beyond breaking wards. She turned to look at him, feeling the bond pulse between them with connection that had grown stronger over the past hours. The curse on you, I can feel it more clearly now. It's not just attached to you. It's anchored to your entire bloodline, reaching back generations to whoever the witch's grandmother targeted as the original recipient. My great-grandfather, he confirmed. The one who led the purge. Right. So the curse is targeting him through you, punishing his descendants for his sins. Which means it's not personal to you specifically, it's generational. Understanding crystallized in her mind. If I can sever that generational link, the curse loses its anchor. It would still exist, but it wouldn't have a target anymore. How do you sever a bloodline link? By rewriting your pack bond structure so you're no longer connected to your ancestors' sins. She saw his expression shift from hope to skepticism. I know how insane that sounds, but Moonborn abilities include bloodline manipulation. It's how we use to prevent hereditary curses and genetic weaknesses from passing to new generations. You're talking about fundamentally altering my connection to my own family. I'm talking about cutting the thread that lets this curse define you through your ancestors' crimes, she corrected. You'd still be their descendant. You just wouldn't be carrying their debts anymore. It was theory built on instinct and newly awakened power. She had no guarantee it would work, no certainty she could actually accomplish what she was suggesting. But it was the only option that didn't involve submission or death. Through the bond, she felt him considering it, weighing the risks against the alternative. Calculating whether the chance of freedom was worth the unknown consequences of bloodline manipulation. Do it, he said finally. Whatever it takes to break this curse, do it. She crossed to stand directly in front of his cell, the corridor between them narrow enough that she could reach through the bars if she stretched. I'll need physical contact. The bond helps, but this kind of working requires direct connection. He extended his hand through the bars without hesitation. She took it, feeling the mate bond flare brighter at the contact, and reached for the moonborn power thrumming through her veins. The curse appeared in her awareness like a cancer, dark tendrils wrapped around his bloodline, pulsing with malevolent intent, fed by generations of witch magic and ancestral sin. It was sophisticated and cruel, designed not just to kill but to maximize suffering, to ensure every mate's death was witnessed and remembered. She traced the threads back, following them through his bloodline to the original anchor point. His great-grandfather's bond structure appeared like a twisted knot of guilt and violence, stained with the deaths of witches he'd killed and curses they'd laid in revenge. The mate-death curse was anchored there, using his sins as fuel to perpetuate across generations. "This is going to hurt," she warned through the bond. "I trust you," he sent back without hesitation. She reached for that knot with power that felt like touching starlight and pulled. The curse fought back immediately. Dark magic surged through the connection, trying to reach her through the bond, trying to consume her the way it had consumed his other mates. But Moonborn blood was designed to resist exactly this kind of attack. Her power wrapped around the curse fragments and neutralized them before they could take hold. She pulled harder, separating bloodline threads with surgical precision, cutting away the connections to his great-grandfather's sins while leaving the family bonds themselves intact. The curse writhed like a living thing, fighting her attempt to sever its anchor, lashing out with enough force to make her gasp. Through their joined hands, she felt the Alpha's pain, the sensation of his bloodline being altered from the inside, connections he'd carried his entire life suddenly reforming into new patterns. His wolf was snarling, disoriented by the changes, and she pushed soothing power through the bond to stabilize him. Almost there. Just a little more. The final thread snapped, and the curse suddenly had nowhere to anchor. It thrashed once, trying to find a new target, then dissipated like smoke as the witch magic holding it together lost cohesion without its bloodline connection. She felt it die. Felt the dark presence that had been wrapped around her mate for 12 years simply cease to exist. The silence that followed was absolute. "It's gone," the Alpha whispered, his voice rough with disbelief. "I can't feel it anymore." The anchor broke, she confirmed, releasing his hand and swaying slightly as exhaustion hit. Breaking a curse that sophisticated had cost her, she could feel her Moonborn power depleted, would need time to recover before attempting anything else major. "You're free." Through the bond, she felt his wolf surging with relief and fierce joy, no longer fighting a curse that had defined half his life. Felt his gratitude and awe bleeding through their connection like sunrise after endless night. "You broke a curse that's been killing my mates for 12 years, he said quietly. "In a prison cell. While chained. Without any training." "I'm Moonborn," she replied, managing a tired smile. "Apparently we're good at the impossible." His laugh was shaky but genuine. "Apparently." She leaned against the cell bars, feeling the wards pulse around them with continued hostility. The curse was broken but they were still trapped. Still facing slavery or execution at dawn, still surrounded by witches who had 300 years of experience killing wolves who threatened them. But for the first time since accepting the Alpha's mark on the execution platform, she felt genuinely hopeful. Because if she could break a generational curse with newly awakened power and no training, then maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to break them both out of this prison and reshape the entire balance of power between wolves and witches in the process. If you're wondering how a Moonborn wolf with no training escapes a 300-year-old witch prison, stay with me. They spent the rest of the night planning their escape in whispers that wouldn't carry beyond the cells. The curse breaking had exhausted her Moonborn reserves, but her normal wolf abilities were still fully functional. Enhanced hearing let them map guard rotations. Enhanced scent helped identify which witches were powerful enough to be threats versus support staff. And the mate bond gave them a communication channel the witches couldn't intercept. 3 guards rotate through this corridor every 4 hours, the Alpha murmured, his enhanced perception matching hers. They change shifts at dawn, that's when we'll have the briefest window of reduced surveillance. The wards reset during shift changes, she added, having spent hours studying the magical patterns surrounding their cells. About 30 seconds where they're transitioning between power sources. If I time it right, I can slip through while they're weakest. And then I get you out and we run before the entire coven descends on us. It was barely a plan. More like organized suicide. But it was better than accepting slavery or waiting for execution. Through the bond, she felt his reluctance not to escape, but to let her take the risk while he stayed imprisoned. His wolf was snarling at the indignity of being protected by his mate instead of protecting her. "I'm Moonborn," she reminded him gently. "I can survive things you can't. Let me do this." "I don't like it," he sent back, but she felt his resignation. He knew she was right. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. She used the time to recover as much strength as possible, drawing on wolf healing and Moonborn reserves that slowly replenished like a tide coming back in. By the time she heard footsteps approaching that signaled the dawn shift change, she was as ready as she'd ever be. The guards passed her cell first, 2 witches she recognized from the border ambush, their attention focused on their conversation about some coven politics she didn't care about. They opened the Alpha's cell to check his restraints, a routine security measure they performed every shift change. That was the moment she'd been waiting for. The wards flickered as power sources transitioned. She reached through the bars with Moonborn ability and touched the door's locking mechanism, not breaking it, just convincing it that it was already open. The door swung outward silently, and she was through before the guards registered movement. She moved with wolf speed, crossing the corridor in 2 strides and driving her fist into the first guard's throat before the witch could raise an alarm. The second guard opened her mouth to scream, but the Alpha, now free with his door open and restraints undone, caught her from behind and applied pressure to nerves that made her collapse unconscious. They stared at each other across the fallen guards for half a heartbeat. Then the Alpha grabbed her hand and they ran. The prison was larger than she'd estimated, multiple levels connected by stone staircases, each corridor lined with cells holding other supernatural prisoners. They passed vampires, fae, rogue wolves, even a few beings she couldn't identify. Some reached through bars as they ran past, begging for release. She felt guilt twist in her chest but couldn't stop. Not with alarms beginning to sound throughout the facility. "Exit should be 2 levels up," the Alpha said, his memory of the layout from when they'd been brought in proving accurate. "But they'll have sealed it by now. Then we make our own exit." She could feel the building's structure through her Moonborn senses, stone and mortar held together by witch wards, but fundamentally still just physical material. The exterior wall appeared ahead, solid rock reinforced with magic that would kill them if they tried to breach it conventionally. She didn't breach it conventionally. Instead, she reached for the fundamental bonds holding the molecules together and convinced them to loosen. Just temporarily. Just enough to create a gap wide enough for 2 wolves to squeeze through. The wall rippled like water, and they dove through the opening before it could re-solidify. Alarms shrieked behind them. Voices shouted orders. Power surged as the coven's strongest witches responded to the escape. They hit the forest at a full sprint, shifting mid-stride into wolf forms that could move faster and more efficiently through dense woodland. The mate bond blazed between their beasts, synchronizing their movements until they were running in perfect coordination. Behind them, pursuit launched with terrifying efficiency. She could feel witch magic tracking them, wards activating to slow their progress, spells designed to immobilize fleeing prisoners crackling through the air like lightning. "Split up," the Alpha sent through the bond. "They'll follow me, I'm the bigger threat." "You can. We split up and they capture us separately," she interrupted. "We stay together or we die together. Those are the only options." She felt his frustration war with fierce approval. His wolf wanted to protect her by drawing danger away. Her wolf insisted on standing beside him regardless of risk. The bond won. They stayed together. They ran for 3 hours, pushing enhanced endurance to its limits. The pursuit never fully disappeared but gradually fell behind as they put distance between themselves and the prison facility. By the time they finally stopped in a ravine deep enough to provide cover, both of them were heaving for breath and running on fumes. The Alpha shifted back to human form first, checking their surroundings with tactical precision. "We're still in coven territory. They'll keep hunting until we cross into neutral ground. How far to the border? 2 days at this pace. Less if we push, but we're already exhausted." She shifted back as well, feeling muscles protest the transformation after hours of sustained running. "They know what I am now. What I can do. They're not going to let a Moonborn wolf escape alive. Then we need leverage." His expression was calculating. Something valuable enough that they'll negotiate instead of killing us outright. Like what? He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his eyes brightened with an idea that felt dangerous even before he spoke it aloud. You broke my curse by severing bloodline connections. That ability, manipulating bonds and breaking curses, is exactly what the coven wanted to exploit by enslaving you. Your point? My point is that we offer them a trade. You'll serve as their curse repository like they wanted, but on your terms instead of theirs. Limited duration, specific compensation, and protection guaranteed for both of us. She stared at him. You want me to walk back into slavery voluntarily? I want us to negotiate from a position of strength instead of weakness, he corrected. Right now we're fugitives being hunted through hostile territory. If we approach them with an offer, one that gives them what they want while protecting your autonomy, we might be able to broker an actual agreement instead of being forced into their terms. It was risky and possibly insane. But it was also the first suggestion that didn't involve endless running or fighting battles they couldn't win. What makes you think they'll negotiate? She asked. Because you're the first Moonborn they've encountered in 5 generations, and you just proved you can break curses they couldn't even scratch. His smile was sharp. They want your abilities. We just have to make sure the cost is high enough that they respect you instead of trying to own you. Through the bond, she felt his certainty, not that it would work, but that it was their best option. Better to negotiate with leverage than wait until they were too exhausted to run and got captured anyway. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. All right. We go back. But I do the talking, and we walk away the moment they try to impose unacceptable terms. Agreed. They rested for an hour, letting enhanced healing repair the worst of their exhaustion. Then they turned around and headed back toward the prison they'd just escaped, carrying nothing but a desperate plan and the bond between them. The coven was waiting. The witch from the border met them at the same clearing where they'd been ambushed, flanked by enough magical firepower to level a small city. You came back, she observed, her tone suggesting she was genuinely surprised. I was expecting to hunt you for days. We came back to negotiate, the protagonist said before the alpha could speak. On our terms this time. The witch's eyebrow rose. You escaped from a facility that has held prisoners for 300 years, and you think that gives you negotiating power? I think I broke a generational curse in a prison cell using abilities I've had for less than a week, she corrected. And I think that makes me valuable enough that you'll listen to what I have to offer instead of trying to force terms I won't accept. Silence stretched between them, broken only by wind through the trees. The other witches watched with predatory stillness, ready to attack if their leader gave the order. The alpha stood at her shoulder. His wolf riding the surface and ready to defend her even though they were outnumbered 20-1. Speak, the witch said finally. You want a Moonborn to serve as curse repository, someone who can contain and neutralize your most dangerous magical weapons without requiring constant maintenance. She kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. I'm willing to do that. But not as your slave or your prisoner. What terms are you proposing? 1 year of service. I'll contain the curses you specify, help with research on Moonborn abilities, and provide consultation on magical theory related to bloodline manipulation. She felt the alpha's approval through the bond, along with his readiness to fight if this went wrong. In exchange, you break the mate death curse permanently, not just for my mate, but destroy the spell entirely so it can never be recast. You provide sanctuary for both of us during the service period. And you guarantee safe passage out of coven territory with no pursuit when the year ends. The witch considered this for a long moment. 1 year is barely enough time to study what you're capable of, much less utilize your abilities properly. 1 year is all I'm offering. After that, you'll have comprehensive documentation of Moonborn capabilities and I'll have paid whatever blood debt you think wolves owe your coven for past atrocities. And if you die during the service period from curse exposure? Then you'll have learned the limits of Moonborn endurance and can adjust your research accordingly. She met the witch's eyes without flinching. But I don't plan on dying. I plan on surviving long enough to walk out of here with my mate and never look back. The other witches were murmuring now, clearly divided on whether to accept these terms or simply kill them both and find another Moonborn eventually. The lead witch raised a hand for silence, then turned to confer quietly with her advisors. Through the bond. The protagonist felt the alpha's wolf prowling just beneath his skin, ready to shift at the first sign of betrayal. If this goes bad, he sent, shift immediately and run north. I'll hold them off long enough for you to escape. We both escape or neither of us does, she sent back firmly. Stop trying to sacrifice yourself. Someone has to survive, he replied with grim practicality. Better you than both of us dead. Before she could argue further, the witch turned back to face them. The coven accepts your terms with 3 modifications. First, the service period will be 15 months, not 12. Second, you'll submit to regular monitoring to ensure the curse containment isn't degrading your health. Third, if you attempt to escape or break contract before the term ends, we reserve the right to hunt you both without mercy. It was more than she'd hoped for and less restrictive than she'd feared. 15 months was manageable. Monitoring made sense if they were concerned about her survival. And the escape clause was fair, she had no intention of breaking contract anyway. Agreed, she said, feeling the alpha's reluctant acceptance through the bond. When do we start? Now. The witch gestured, and 2 of her companions stepped forward carrying a contract written on parchment that glowed faintly with binding magic. Sign this. Both of you. It will enforce the terms magically, neither party can violate the agreement without severe consequences. She read through the contract carefully, checking for hidden clauses or exploitative language. It was surprisingly straightforward, exactly what they'd negotiated, with protections built in for both sides. The magical enforcement would ensure the coven couldn't abuse their position any more than she could break contract without penalty. The alpha read over her shoulder, his enhanced perception catching details she might have missed. Through the bond, she felt his grudging approval, the contract was fair. Which meant the witches were taking this seriously. They signed together, and power flared through the parchment as the binding magic activated. She felt it settle into her bones like a brand, connecting her to the contract's terms with absolute certainty that violation would result in immediate, severe consequences. Congratulations, the witch said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You're officially under coven protection for the next 15 months. Try not to die before the contract expires. She wanted to say something defiant, but exhaustion was catching up with her and the reality of what she'd just agreed to was sinking in. 15 months of containing curses that could kill her. 15 months of being studied like a laboratory specimen. 15 months of hoping her Moonborn abilities were strong enough to survive what she'd volunteered for. The alpha's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining, and she felt his support through the bond. We'll get through this, he sent. Together. Together, she agreed. The witch gestured for them to follow. Come. I'll show you to your quarters. You'll need rest before we begin curse integration tomorrow. They followed the coven deeper into witch territory, past wards that recognized the contract magic and allowed them passage. The facility they'd escaped from appeared in the distance, looking far less threatening now that they were technically guests instead of prisoners. She'd traded freedom for survival, slavery for service, condemned rogue status for protected contractor position. Whether that trade would save them or destroy them remained to be seen. But as they were led to quarters that were comfortable rather than cells, as the contract magic hummed in her bones with binding certainty, she allowed herself to feel cautiously optimistic. They were alive. They were together. And she had 15 months to prove that Moonborn wolves could work with witch covens instead of being hunted by them. It wasn't the happy ending she'd imagined on the execution platform. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, that was enough. The first curse integration happened 3 days later, and it nearly killed her. They'd given her time to rest and recover from the escape and running. The quarters were comfortable, a suite in the coven's residential section with actual beds, running water, and windows that weren't barred. The alpha stayed with her, his presence a constant anchor as she adjusted to being surrounded by witches who'd tried to imprison them less than a week ago. The coven's curse specialist, an ancient witch who'd been collecting and studying dark magic for 70 years, explained the process with clinical detachment. We'll start with something minor. A misfortune hex that's been active for 6 months. It causes minor accidents and bad luck to its target. Nothing fatal, but persistent enough to be annoying. And you want me to contain it? Take it into your bloodline the way your ancestors did. Neutralize the active effects while preserving the magical structure for study. The specialist gestured to a glass container holding what looked like black smoke given semi-solid form. This curse is already detached from its target. All you need to do is absorb it. She looked at the Alpha, who was watching with barely concealed concern. Through the bond, she felt his wolf prowling anxiously, hating that he couldn't protect her from this. "I'll be fine," she said with more confidence than she felt. She reached for the container and opened it. The curse erupted outward like living shadow, immediately seeking a new target. Before it could latch onto anyone else, she grabbed it with Moonborn power and pulled it into herself. Pain exploded through her system. The curse fought containment with vicious determination, trying to burrow into her bloodline and corrupt it from within. Her Moonborn defenses activated automatically, building barriers around the dark magic and neutralizing its active effects. But the process was agonizing, like swallowing broken glass coated in acid. She felt the Alpha's arms around her before she realized she'd collapsed. Felt his desperate concern bleeding through the bond as she convulsed with the effort of containing magic that wanted to destroy her from the inside out. "It's too much," he snarled at the specialist. "She's not ready." "She's doing fine," the specialist countered, her voice maddeningly calm. "The initial integration is always painful. Once her bloodline adapts, subsequent curses will be easier." The pain gradually subsided as her Moonborn abilities wrapped the curse in layers of protective energy that rendered it inert. She could feel it now, tucked away in a corner of her bloodline like a dormant virus, present but neutralized, dangerous but controlled. "Status?" the specialist asked. "Contained," she gasped. But that was significantly more difficult than expected. "You'll adapt. Moonborn bloodlines are designed for this, they strengthen with exposure." The specialist made notes in a leather journal. "We'll give you a week to stabilize before attempting the next integration. 7 days to recover from absorbing a minor hex." She had 42 more curses to contain over the next 15 months, some of them exponentially more powerful than what she'd just survived. The math was not encouraging. But she'd signed the contract and given her word. So she spent the following week letting her bloodline adapt, studying Moonborn theory in the covens library, and trying not to think about how close she'd come to dying from a curse the witches considered minor. The second integration went smoother. A jealousy curse that had been causing relationship problems for its target, she absorbed it with significantly less pain and better control. The third was harder. A wasting sickness curse that made her feverish for 2 days before her bloodline neutralized it completely. By the 5th curse, she'd developed a technique. Instead of fighting the dark magic's attempt to integrate, she created designated spaces in her bloodline specifically designed to house curse energy. Quarantine zones where the magic could exist without corrupting her core nature. The specialist was impressed. "You're adapting faster than expected. Most curse containers don't develop compartmentalization until months into the process." "I'm motivated," she said dryly. The Alpha watched every integration with fierce protectiveness, his wolf ready to intervene if things went wrong. Through the bond, she drew strength from his presence, anchor points of certainty and devotion that helped her maintain sense of self even as she filled with dark magic. But it was taking a toll. She could feel it in how her Moonborn abilities were shifting, adapting to constant curse exposure by becoming harder and more defensive. In how her instincts were sharpening toward threat assessment and survival. In how the gentle power that had broken the mate-death curse was slowly being shaped into something darker by necessity. "You're changing," the Alpha observed one night after a particularly difficult integration. "I can feel it through the bond." "I know." She was too exhausted to deny it. "The curse exposure is affecting my bloodline. Making it more resilient but also more aggressive." "Is that permanent?" "I don't know. Maybe. Probably." She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "But it's better than being dead." "Is it though?" His voice was quiet with concern. "If you survive these 15 months but lose yourself in the process, what's the point?" She didn't have an answer for that. 3 months passed. 15 curses contained. Her bloodline was stronger now, capable of absorbing dark magic with significantly less trauma than those first integrations. But the cost was becoming clearer. She could feel her Moonborn nature hardening, the gentle healing abilities her mother had told her about corrupting into something more suited for warfare than restoration. The coven noticed too. The specialist's notes became more detailed, tracking not just curse containment but the observable changes in her demeanor and abilities. They were studying her transformation with scientific fascination, documenting how prolonged curse exposure reshaped Moonborn genetics. "You're becoming a weapon," the Alpha said bluntly after reading one of the specialist's reports that had been left carelessly unattended. "They're not just using you to contain curses, they're learning how to transform Moonborn wolves into magical arsenals." "I know. And you're okay with that?" She thought about the execution platform. About being condemned for defending herself. About spending 23 years powerless and invisible. About discovering she carried abilities that made her valuable instead of disposable. "I'm okay with becoming strong enough that no one can condemn me to death ever again," she said quietly. "If that means being a weapon, so be it." Through the bond, she felt his complex response, pride in her strength, concern for what she was becoming, and fierce devotion to standing beside her regardless of how dark this path got. They were 6 months into the contract when the coven requested she attempt her first major curse integration. The mate death curse that had killed the Alpha's 7 previous mates. The specialist had finally broken the curse structure down enough to understand how it worked and, more importantly, how to preserve it for future use while keeping it safely contained. She wanted the protagonist to absorb it the same way she'd absorbed the 40 other curses now living dormant in her bloodline. "No," the Alpha said flatly when they explained the plan. "Absolutely not. That curse is too dangerous." "I've contained 40 curses over 6 months," she interrupted. "I can handle this." Those were minor hexes and moderate afflictions. This curse killed 7 women in less than 24 hours each. It's exponentially more powerful. Which is exactly why the coven wants it preserved instead of destroyed, the specialist added. Mate death curses are rare and extremely valuable as deterrents against pack aggression. If she can contain it, we have a weapon that can be deployed strategically. The protagonist looked at the glass container holding remnants of the curse that had defined her mate's life for 12 years. That had killed women who'd been brave enough or desperate enough to accept his mark. That had nearly consumed her before her Moonborn blood had neutralized it. Taking it into her bloodline felt like justice and hubris in equal measure. "I'll do it," she said. "But I need 3 days to prepare. This isn't something I can absorb casually." The specialist agreed, and she spent the next 72 hours reinforcing her bloodline's quarantine zones, strengthening the barriers between contained curses and her core nature, preparing for the most dangerous integration she'd attempted yet. The Alpha barely left her side, his concern bleeding through the bond in waves that made her chest ache. "If this goes wrong," he started. "If this goes wrong, you pull me back," she interrupted. "Through the mate bond. Be my anchor. Don't let the curse consume me the way it consumed your other mates. And if I can't?" She met his eyes steadily. "Then you'll know I died trying to contain the curse that made your life hell. That's better than dying on an execution platform or in a prison cell." It wasn't comforting, but it was honest. The integration happened on a grey morning with storm clouds gathering overhead. The specialist opened the container, and the mate death curse erupted with malevolent hunger that made everyone in the room flinch. The protagonist grabbed it with Moonborn power and pulled it into herself before she could think twice. Agony beyond anything she'd experienced before crashed through her system. The curse was massive, sophisticated, designed to maximize suffering before death. It fought containment with everything it had, trying to burrow into her bloodline and corrupt her from within. She felt the Alpha through the bond, his presence a blazing anchor point as the curse tried to drown her. Felt her Moonborn defenses activating with desperate intensity, building walls around the dark magic even as it threatened to overwhelm her completely. Her vision went black. Her heart stuttered. For a terrible moment, she felt herself slipping, felt the curse winning, felt death reaching for her with familiar claws. Then the Alpha's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "You're mine. The curse doesn't get to take you. Come back." She grabbed onto that certainty like a lifeline and pulled. Her Moonborn bloodline surged with power drawn from the mate bond, reinforcing barriers and containing the curse with brutal finality. When her vision cleared, she was on the floor with the Alpha holding her against his chest and the Specialist staring with expressions caught between awe and scientific satisfaction. "Status?" the Specialist asked. She took inventory carefully. The mate death curse was contained, massive and dangerous, and absolutely secured in the strongest quarantine zone she'd ever constructed. It wouldn't escape. Wouldn't threaten anyone. Would remain dormant and preserved exactly as the Coven wanted. But it had cost her. She could feel the toll immediately. Her Moonborn nature had hardened further in response to containing something that powerful. The gentle healing abilities were almost completely corrupted now, reshaped into something built for warfare and survival rather than restoration. "Contained," she said hoarsely. "But that's the last major curse I'm attempting for at least a month. I need time to stabilize." The Specialist nodded approvingly. "Acceptable. You've proven the concept works. The remaining integrations can wait until you've recovered." She'd contained the curse that had destroyed her mate's life for 12 years. Had proven Moonborn wolves could serve as magical weapons repositories. Had survived what should have killed her. But as the Alpha helped her back to their quarters and she felt the weight of 41 curses now living dormant in her bloodline, she couldn't shake the feeling that survival was becoming increasingly indistinguishable from corruption. And she had 9 months left on a contract that was reshaping her into something her mother would barely recognize. The final months of the contract passed in a haze of curse integrations and gradual transformation. She contained 23 more curses over 9 months, each one adding to the weight she carried in her bloodline. Some were minor, bad luck hexes and minor afflictions that barely registered. Others were significant, wasting curses, madness hexes, bloodline corruptions that took weeks to fully neutralize. None were as dangerous as the mate death curse, but collectively they reshaped her Moonborn abilities into something her ancestors would have struggled to recognize. The gentle healing power had fully corrupted into combat magic. Her ability to strengthen pack bonds had transformed into the capacity to sever them entirely. The natural connection to the moon goddess that should have been her birthright felt distant and muted, overwhelmed by the dark magic she carried. She was becoming exactly what the Coven wanted, a living weapon capable of containing and deploying curses with surgical precision. And she hated how much she didn't mind the transformation. The Alpha watched it happen with complex emotions that bled through their bond. Pride in her strength. Grief for what she was losing. Fierce determination to love her regardless of how dark she became. He was her anchor, the only thing keeping her connected to who she'd been before the execution platform. 2 weeks left, he observed one evening as they sat in their quarters, rain hammering against the windows. "Then we're free." "Free to go where?" she asked. "I can't go back to pack territory carrying 40+ active curses in my bloodline. I'm a walking magical weapon. Your pack would execute me on principle." "Then we don't go back to pack territory," he said simply. "We find somewhere neutral. Build something new. You're not the only supernatural refugee who needs sanctuary." It was the first time he'd seriously discussed their future beyond surviving the contract. She turned to look at him, seeing the male who'd given her a choice when he could have kept her imprisoned, who'd stood beside her through curse integrations that should have killed her, who'd never once suggested she was becoming something monstrous even as her Moonborn nature corrupted. "You still want me," she said quietly. "Even like this." "Especially like this," he corrected. "You're the strongest wolf I've ever met. The fact that strength came at a cost doesn't make it less valuable or you less worthy of devotion." Through the bond, she felt the absolute sincerity of his words. He saw what she was becoming and loved her not despite it but including it. Accepted that she was no longer the powerless rogue condemned on an execution platform, but something harder and darker and infinitely more dangerous. "I'm not who I was," she admitted. "Neither am I. The curse made me cautious and isolated and afraid to bond with anyone. You broke that. Made me remember what it felt like to hope." His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "We're both different than we were 15 months ago. That doesn't mean we're broken." "What if I am though?" "Broken, I mean." Then we're broken together, he said. And we figure out how to be whole again one day at a time. It was the kind of promise that shouldn't have worked, too simple for the complexity of what they'd survived. But through the mate bond, she felt its truth resonating like a tuning fork. They'd walked through darkness together. Survived impossible odds. Been reshaped by forces that should have destroyed them. And they were still standing, still bonded, still choosing each other every single day. Maybe that was enough. The contract ended on a cold morning with frost on the windows, and the coven assembled to witness the completion of their arrangement. 64 curses contained over 15 months, the specialist announced, reading from her comprehensive documentation. Moonborn bloodline successfully adapted to serve as magical repository without catastrophic degradation. Subject demonstrates expected corruption of healing abilities into combat applications. Overall assessment, experiment successful. She hated being called an experiment but didn't bother correcting the terminology. The contract was complete. The coven had their data. She and the Alpha had their freedom. The lead witch, the same one who'd ambushed them at the border over a year ago, stepped forward with the contract parchment. The binding is complete. You're free to leave coven territory with our guarantee of safe passage and no pursuit. The protection clause remains in effect. Any wolf who attempts to execute you for being Moonborn will answer to our coven. Why? She asked. Why protect me after the contract ends? The witch's smile was calculating. Because you're proof that Moonborn wolves can be valuable allies instead of threats to eliminate. And because if word spreads that a Moonborn served a coven contract successfully and survived, other supernatural refugees might be willing to negotiate with us instead of fighting. You're more useful as an example than as a cautionary tale. It was pragmatic and entirely without sentiment. But it was also protection she hadn't expected and couldn't afford to refuse. Thank you, she said formally. Don't thank me yet, the witch replied. You're carrying 64 active curses in your bloodline. That makes you valuable but also incredibly dangerous. Someone will eventually try to exploit what you've become, whether that's wolf packs wanting to weaponize you or other covens wanting to study you. Your freedom comes with the burden of being exactly what we transformed you into. She was aware. Had been aware for months. Accepted it as the price of survival. The Alpha stepped up beside her, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture of support and possession. Then they'll have to go through both of us. The witch's smile widened fractionally. I almost hope they try. It would be fascinating to see what a curse-bearing Moonborn and a formerly cursed Alpha can accomplish when properly motivated. They left coven territory that afternoon, walking through the same border they'd crossed over a year ago as prisoners facing execution or slavery. This time, they crossed as equals, dangerous, valuable, and absolutely free. Where to? The Alpha asked as they reached neutral ground. She thought about pack territories that would execute her on sight. About which covens that would want to study or exploit her abilities. About the weight of 64 curses living dormant in her bloodline, waiting to be deployed or contained depending on what she chose. Somewhere we can build something new, she said finally. Somewhere refugees like us can find sanctuary without having to serve contracts or survive execution attempts. Somewhere the rules are different because we're the ones writing them. Through the bond, she felt his fierce approval. That's ambitious. I'm Moonborn, she replied with a smile that held edges sharp enough to cut. Ambition is in my bloodline. They walked into the wilderness together, two wolves reshaped by darkness. Bound by mate bond and mutual survival, carrying enough power between them to challenge the established order of their entire world. The packs that had condemned her would learn what happened when you sentenced a Moonborn to death and she survived. The covens that had tried to enslave her would discover what she'd become through their own experimentation. And the supernatural world that had spent 5 generations believing Moonborn wolves were extinct would have to reckon with the reality that one had returned harder, darker, and absolutely done with being powerless. She'd survived the execution platform. Survived the cursed Alpha's mark. Survived 15 months of curse integrations that should have killed her. Now she was going to do more than survive. She was going to reshape everything. They built sanctuary in the borderlands between wolf territory and witch domain, unclaimed ground where neither species held authority and refugees of all kinds gathered to escape persecution. It started small. A clearing. A few structures. Basic protections. But word spread quickly through supernatural communities. There was a place where moonborn wolves and cursed alphas offered protection to anyone fleeing execution, slavery, or forced servitude. Rogues arrived first, wolves exiled from their packs for crimes real and imagined. She tested each one, using her moonborn abilities to read their pack bonds and determine if they were genuinely seeking refuge or threats in disguise. The dangerous ones were turned away with warnings. The genuine refugees were welcomed. Then witches came, practitioners who'd been cast out of covens for refusing to participate in dark magic or questioning leadership. The alpha negotiated with them carefully, building alliances based on mutual benefit rather than dominance. Vampires, fae, shapeshifters of non-wolf varieties all found their way to the sanctuary. Within 6 months, they had a functioning community of over 200 refugees representing a dozen different supernatural species. And at the center of it all, she stood as the moonborn Luna who carried 64 curses in her bloodline and used that power to protect anyone who sought shelter within their borders. The packs noticed. Of course they noticed. Her old pack, Crescent Moon, sent representatives demanding she return to face execution for the beater's son's murder. She met them at the border with the alpha beside her and enough curse-corrupted power radiating from her skin to make them flinch. "I was condemned to death," she said calmly. "I survived. That sentence is void. You killed a ranked wolf." "In self-defense," she interrupted. "Which you refused to acknowledge because he was the beater's son and I was powerless." "I'm not powerless anymore. Leave my territory or learn exactly what a moonborn wolf can do when properly motivated." They left. Word spread faster after that. The condemned rogue had returned as something infinitely more dangerous than what she'd been. Other packs tried different approaches. Some offered alliance, protection in exchange for her curse-bearing abilities being deployed against their enemies. She refused every offer that involved using her power offensively. The curses she carried were defensive measures only, deployed to protect sanctuary borders or defend refugees from persecution. The alpha's old pack, Blackwater, sent his beater with an offer to return as alpha if he agreed to leave her behind. She felt his fury through the bond before he even opened his mouth to refuse. "This wolf is my mate," the alpha said with dangerous quiet. "My Luna. The foundation of everything we're building here. Any pack that wants my leadership has to accept her as part of the package. Non-negotiable." The beater left without agreement. Blackwater pack would fracture without strong alpha leadership, but that was their choice to make. The sanctuary thrived despite, or perhaps because of, being rejected by established power structures. They built their own hierarchy based on skills and contributions rather than species or bloodline. Created laws that protected refugees from exploitation. Developed trade relationships with neutral parties who valued what they offered, safe haven and magical services that didn't require servitude. She used her moonborn abilities to strengthen pack bonds for rogues who wanted community, to heal curse damage in refugees who'd been afflicted by dark magic, to create protective wards around their borders that would alert them to threats without restricting movement. The curse-corrupted combat abilities served their purpose too. When rogue packs tested their borders, she deployed contained curses with surgical precision enough to drive attackers away without killing, enough to demonstrate why assaulting sanctuary territory was a catastrophically bad idea. The Alpha built their tactical defenses, training their strongest refugees in combat and strategy. Together they created something unprecedented, a supernatural community that didn't rely on subjugation or forced hierarchy, where refugees could rebuild without fearing execution or slavery. It wasn't perfect. Conflicts arose. Resources were sometimes scarce. Threats from both wolf packs and witch covens required constant vigilance. But it was theirs, built on principles they chose rather than rules imposed by species or bloodline. 1 year after establishing sanctuary, the Thornwood Coven sent representatives with an offer. "We're impressed with what you've built," the lead witch said, a different one than she'd contracted with, younger and more diplomatic. "And we'd like to propose an alliance." access to your Moonborn expertise in exchange for magical protections and resources. She considered it carefully. The coven had honored their contract and provided protection as promised. An alliance could benefit sanctuary refugees who needed magical support beyond what she could provide alone. "What are your terms?" she asked. "Consultation on Moonborn abilities and curse theory, provided on your schedule and compensated fairly. Access to sanctuary grounds for witch refugees who need protection. And occasional deployment of your curse-bearing abilities for mutual defense situations." It was reasonable. Respectful of her autonomy while acknowledging her value. Nothing like the slavery they'd initially tried to impose. "Agreed," she said. "With the caveat that I maintain veto power over any curse deployment requests. I won't be weaponized against refugees or used to enforce coven politics." Acceptable. They formalized the alliance with magical contract, nothing as binding as her original service agreement, just standard supernatural treaty magic. The Thornwood Coven became Sanctuary's first formal ally, providing resources and protection in exchange for consultation and expertise. Other covens followed. Vampire councils. Fey courts. Gradually, the Sanctuary became a recognized neutral ground where supernatural politics could be negotiated without risking open warfare. And through it all, the mate bond between her and the Alpha grew stronger, tempered by shared purpose and mutual devotion, anchored by the certainty that they'd chosen each other every single day since the execution platform. "Do you regret it?" he asked one night as they stood on the sanctuary walls, watching sunset paint the horizon in shades of gold and crimson. "Everything that happened. The curse, the contract, becoming this." She thought about the powerless rogue condemned to death. About the Moonborn abilities sealed away for 23 years. About the 64 curses living dormant in her bloodline and the sanctuary full of refugees who'd found protection because she'd survived impossible odds. "I regret the women who died from your curse before I could break it," she said honestly. "I regret the years I spent invisible and powerless. But do I regret surviving? Becoming this?" She turned to face him fully. "No. I'd do it all again if it meant standing here with you, protecting wolves who deserve better than execution or slavery." Through the bond, she felt his fierce pride and absolute devotion. He pulled her close, and she let herself sink into the embrace, finding comfort in the solid certainty of his presence. They'd both been condemned. Both broken. Both reshaped by forces that should have destroyed them. But they'd survived. Built something new. Proved that strength forged in darkness could be channeled toward protection instead of destruction. The supernatural world was changing, slowly, grudgingly, but undeniably. Packs were beginning to question execution laws. Covens were reconsidering how they treated refugees. And at the center of it all, a Moonborn Luna and her cursed Alpha were rewriting the rules one sanctuary resident at a time. She carried 64 curses in her bloodline. He carried the scars of 12 years spent cursed and isolated. Together, they carried the hope of every refugee who'd ever faced condemnation for being different. It wasn't the ending she'd expected when standing on that execution platform 15 months ago. It was infinitely better. The condemned rogue became a Luna. The cursed Alpha found redemption. And together, they built sanctuary from the ashes of everything that tried to destroy them. Their story continues, because in a world where power still corrupts and fear still drives persecution, someone has to stand for the refugees who deserve better. Subscribe to see what happens when the sanctuary they built becomes a target for those who want to maintain the old order.